Welcome, and thanks for listening to Intrinsic Investigations. My name is Mr. Olivo, and I created this podcast because I've been fortunate enough over the last decade to see unique and thought-provoking projects happen in my classroom, and we wanted a place to showcase them. The true heart of this podcast lies not in the content discovered, but in exploring the personal stories of these young researchers as they journey through uncharted and unfamiliar intellectual terrain. By sharing their stories, we hope to normalize the challenges and frustrations that come with independent research, and also share those moments where students transcend the normal grind of the school day to discover concepts that range from the global to deeply personal. We will begin with a brief introduction to the student of focus, why they picked their topic, and discuss their growth over the course of the last year. It should be mentioned that the opinions expressed in this podcast in no way reflect the opinions of our school district, Bergen County Technical Schools and Special Services, or our school itself, Bergen County Technical High School, Teterboro, or the College Board. The work detailed in this podcast was most likely completed in AP Capstone, but this podcast is in no way affiliated with the College Board. We are back with episode 4 of season 3. And for this one, I'm going to allow the student to introduce themselves in Russian. However, I've been told to preface this with, she may butcher the introduction, but go right ahead.
Добрый день. Меня зовут Vazira, and today I will be talking about Russian stereotypes and how they have persisted over time.
So what did you just say to them?
Well, I just said, good morning, my name is Vazira.
All right.
Yeah.
All right, Vazira, here we go. We're going to be talking about Russian stereotypes. In what context are we talking about Russian stereotypes?
So I explored cinematic pastiche, which is basically the reuse and blending of similar types over time, which is basically just a specific kind of symbol is reinterpreted over time. So basically I conducted a qualitative content analysis, and I looked at a show that consists of Russian characters in the 1980s. And then I looked at a more present show, Stranger Things, that was season 1 came out in 2016, and the last season was 2025. So that's basically what I did.
And the first show you mentioned is actually a movie, and what is that movie?
So it's called Red Dawn, and it's basically kind of to reenact a World War III. So it shows how Russian troops invade, I think it's Colorado. I know it's America.
I think you're right. I think it's Colorado.
So they invade an American territory, and they kind of it's not only just Russian troops, but it's also Cuban and Spanish, and just attack the United States.
I didn't realize that. So there's multiple countries invading the United States simultaneously.
Yeah, no, it's it's Russia, but they have different troops.
They have different allies who are supporting them. And we're talking about the original Red Dawn with Patrick Swayze. I believe there was a remake.
Yes, I think it's 2012. It was a remake, but I didn't look at that.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Now what's your cultural background? How do you fit into this question or this examination of Russian stereotypes?
I'm from Uzbekistan, which was part of the Soviet Union, and it collapsed 1991. And I was born and I grew up there, and I also grew up in Ukraine. But my parents fully lived during the Soviet Union, so I think that's what sparked my interest, because just living there and having to grow up there, I realized that a lot of Russians were misinterpreted. And that's kind of what caused me to do this research, because moving into the United States, I've obviously been exposed to many media sites, and I've just seen Russians being interpreted in a certain way, and obviously coming from kind of this background, because after the Soviet Union, the Soviet culture has become part of my background, so I just wanted to look more into that.
In the U.S., what do you feel are... We'll get into the stereotypes that you applied to the media that you studied, but just from what you just described right there and growing up, what do you feel are common stereotypes that are perpetuated in the U.S.? We could go at the media level, or we could just go at in interpersonal dynamics that you've experienced. So if you don't mind getting into that.
So I feel the most common ones are just the Russian accents. People like to mimic that a lot, and just kind of portraying them as evil. Not even in a sense of media, but just in general, people with interpret like Russians as the bad guys and stuff. So, yeah.
Well, you mentioned that as you were doing this project, you were with a friend, and you want to give that anecdote real quick, because I think it proves a point that's going to be important to the work later on.
Yeah, so I was with my friend, and she has a little sister, and we were watching this movie, and she asked her parents, like my friend's parents, she was like, why are the Russians always the bad guys in the movies? So that's like kind of what made me realize, like, oh, this aligns exactly with my research.
All right. And as someone, there's clearly a generational gap between us, because I just had to look this up online. Apparently generations are 25 to 30 years. But I was born in 1981. So in 1991, you have the like kind of the crumbling of the Soviet Union, Uzbekistan. But up until I was 10, the Russians were most certainly the bad guys. And Rocky IV is the epitome. I know we talked about Rocky IV. Did you ever end up watching it?
No, I don't remember.
Yeah, I mean it is like the most U.S. There's literally a montage at one point where Rocky's training against Ivan Drago, who's the Russian version of Rocky, but he's almost like a heartless, cold machine. And he's training on all these like high-tech devices, and Sylvester Stallone's out there in the woods chopping wood to train to battle him, and there's something more virtuous about that. But I feel like in my youth, I was exposed to that propaganda pretty regularly, which is interesting that you chose Stranger Things as the show, because, again, that's happening. The show itself is set in the 80s. But did you notice that the way that the stereotypes were portrayed in Stranger Things, were they different or similar to what was happening in Red Dawn, in the 80s version of that?
So in a sense, they were very similar, because in Red Dawn, like the most prominent theme had to be their behavior and tone. There were, I think, like 39% of the instances that I found were like their behavior, which showed a lot of violence and secrecy, as well as emotionless characters. And
they're just cold.
Yeah, they're just cold
as
like
the Siberian tundra.
Yes, they would show like scenes of the Russian troops like killing the American citizens with like no expressions on their face, and that's what I noted a lot. And these like stayed persistent to Stranger Things. However, like a big change in Stranger Things was that there was a lot more cultural symbols, so like a lot more usage of accents, and like a lot of like symbols being immediately associated with Russians, like for example, like what they wear and like how they look. So yeah, it was like more indirect, but it was still like there. It
was still present. And do you think that's part of the pastiche that the directors of Stranger Things were going for? Like, we want to bring, I don't know if you have evidence of this from them stating it, but almost like they're doing this show that's an 80s throwback horror teen drama. I don't even know how to really describe the genres there. And they were like, you know what's super 80s? Anti-Russian, an anti-Russian storyline. So we'll just make that happen.
Mm-hmm. So like something important to note about Stranger Things was that it was set to be in the 1980s. So yes, like you would think that like the Russian stereotypes have been reinterpreted, which it was, because there was still like a lot of attacks, like the Russian troops attacking the Americans. But I feel like in Red Dawn, it was more like an open warfare. Like it was like Russian troops like in these fields and like fighting battles like with the Americans and like carrying like loads of weapons. But this like was kind of changed in Stranger Things, because it was like less of that. Like they still carried weapons, but it was more like secretive like operations, I would say.
The way that this narrative of the Russians as aggressors, rivals, invaders in Red Dawn. This is what I'm completely ignorant of this, but I was having this thought while I was watching you present the last time. Are there equivalent American stereotypes in Russia that you are aware of? Like in like a Russian film, if there's Americans portrayed, like how are Americans portrayed? Are they just like goofy cowboys who eat hamburgers all the time? Like, I don't know like where they go with their stereotypes. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, so I've noted a lot in Red Dawn of like the Russian troops like kind of stereotyping the Americans. So one of them was that like they said, so Red Dawn had like this re-education camp where they would put like the captured American citizens in, and there was like a loudspeaker, and they basically just stated how America is all about capitalism and money. So like they only care about like the value and profit that they gain in their country. So that was like one thing that I noted, but I don't think in Stranger Things like I noted a lot. All I could remember is that in Stranger Things, the Russians and Americans were always trying to fight to see who's better, like technologically wise. Like they basically were just like in competition with each other of like who can be better and like who could be more advanced than the other.
It's a scientific arms race in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, Red Dawn is set in an invasion, so it's going to be a harsh dynamic throughout the film. Are there any moments of sympathy for a Russian character? I haven't watched it in such a long time, but are there any moments where there's American-Russian interaction and they try to understand each other as people, or is it quite stark in the conflict?
So it's kind of funny because both in Red Dawn and Stranger Things, I noted one stereotype for each of like showing signs of sympathy. So basically in Red Dawn, there was like this kind of resistance group of these teenagers like hiding out in the mountains and like battling these Russian troops. They were called the Wolverines, and over time their group became smaller because they ended up dying by the Russian troops. But by the end, I think there was 2 or 3 characters left, and this was like the last battle of the movie. There was like this Russian troop, and he saw that these the Wolverines were like dying and suffering, and there was just like a moment of like silence where like the Russian troop was just staring at them, and like he kind of just like put his weapon away to like kind of signal like, oh, like I'm not gonna kill them. Mm-hmm. So that was like one sign of sympathy. And for Stranger Things, so this was like kind of like contradicted because there was this character, Jim Hopper. He was stuck in a Russian prison because he was captured by the Russian prisoners, and so there he met this like other prisoner, and Jim Hopper was asking him like, oh, can you like take out my chains, like can you break my chains and whatever. And the Russian prisoner agreed. However, he was like, only if you give me food or like other stuff in return. Mm-hmm. So he did like end up breaking the chain for him, but he had to like give him something in, like back, which was like food. So Jim Hopper like had to sacrifice his food. But then also at the end, the Russian prisoner ended up calling him like something like, it's just like something like bad, like a derogatory saying, calling him like a crazy American and stuff.
Okay. Where is there more sympathy did you feel between these two movies? You're saying like that's a stereotype that pops up, like these moments of, even though there's obviously geopolitical forces at play and interpersonal forces at play, like there's this moment of like, hey, you're a human being and maybe we shouldn't be trying to kill each other. Did you feel like that was stronger in the Stranger Things elements or in what you saw with Red Dawn?
I think it was stronger in Stranger Things because there was like a lot of Russian characters there. And I would say, I think this is season 4, season 5. This character Alexei gets introduced, and he was a Russian scientist. And I don't remember exactly what happened, but I do remember that he was with Jim Hopper and they like kind of escaped together, and they were working a lot with him, except he didn't speak like English, so they kind of had to bring him to another guy that speaks Russian. And yeah, they were just like collaborating with him like throughout the movie and stuff. So I would say like there was more sympathy in Stranger Things. Which is the more modern of the two. The more modern series.
I feel as though this happens quite often in this class when students do media studies projects centered around stereotypes. You usually operate deductively. Like you have these theories where, okay, like these are common Russian stereotypes, and I'm going to see with my observations if they fit these prevailing stereotypical theories. Is that what you did in this case, or did you do something more inductive where you observed the films and then you were like, okay, like let me see what keeps happening between these two shows? How did you approach that?
So I would say I did more of like an inductive. I just like conducted the research, and after I collected all my raw data, I kind of just counted the number of instances of each, like how many character roles, how many behavior and tone, or like dialogue or cultural symbols, and then I put them on a chart to see like which one was the most frequent in like both Red Dawn and Stranger Things. And then at the end, like that's when I compared to see like which instances came up more than the other.
Okay, and when once you had that, did you compare it to existing literature to see how it sort of jived what was already established in the field?
So, like, beginningly, like, before I even did my method, I was looking at literature to see, like, what, like, Russian stereotypes were the most common, and they were, like, mostly associated with, like, the environment or their violence and stuff like that, but I didn't directly compare it in my paper. I just, like, kept at note to see, like, which ones came up more and, like, which ones I found were different, but I generally just compared the stereotypes I found in Red Dawn and Stranger Things.
Okay, when you say the environment, do you mean that Russia is just always snowing? Is like that a stereotype?
Yeah, so
or,
I didn't...
What does that look like?
I didn't see that in Red Dawn, but I did see it in Stranger Things because there was...
Red Dawn's in Colorado.
Yeah, so there was like a Russian laboratory in Russia, and there was like scenes of the outside, and it was like mostly all snowing. And even in the prison that Jim Hopper was in, it was like all snow, and they would have to like... just build like tracks and stuff, and it was just like snowing all the time.
It is typically portrayed as a very snowy place, but I obviously, is that true?
Well, I would say like yes, but it's like really cold in Russia, but it's never like always snowing, like I would say in most parts.
It's also a huge country, so I'm sure there's
it's a huge
areas
country.
And there's areas that are like, okay, no, it's not really snowing here at all, but I guess they're just posing it as this monolith of snow. What were the most common themes and stereotypes that you found through your inductive examination of these two, like basically a film in this show?
So I would say the most was obviously violence, because there was a lot of violence going on between the Russians and the Americans. But another one I would like to note, another one I would like to also note is like the Soviet like imagery, because in Red Dawn and Stranger Things, there was a lot of like references of like Soviet culture. Like for example, like the uniforms that people wore, the Russian troops wore during the Soviet Union, or even like the flags. Like there was like a depiction of the USSR flag, like in Red Dawn.
Like the hammer and sickle red.
Yeah, obviously it wasn't the same exact thing, but it was red and yellow, which is like trying to mimic it, and it was also seen in Stranger Things. And
why do you think that was there? Or what was, when you were trying to like derive meaning from this and thickly describe it, like what were you seeing as the intentions there and the meaning there? So obviously, Red Dawn came out in the 1980s, and Stranger Things was set to be in the 1980s, which was, I'm guessing, during the Cold War. Yeah. I mean, it's weirdly the same exact time period.
So yeah, it was like during the Cold War and like the Soviet Union, which is like why they wanted to depict this like imagery to show that like, oh yeah, like this is supposed to be like during the Cold War and the Soviet Union times.
What do you think the most significant thing you discovered from examining these two shows was, and why do you think that?
I think like the most significant thing I found is that like these stereotypes did persist over time, but more modernly it was very different than what I expected. So it wasn't like solely just violence. It was also a lot of secrecy, because in season 3, like the plot was like mainly of like Russians kind of having this underground secret base under like the Starcourt Mall in America. And under this mall, they had this base where like the Russians would just operate and kind of try and bring this like evil animal back to life. And with this creature...
We talking about demigorgons right
Yes,
now? Yeah,
demigorgons.
Okay.
It might be confusing if people haven't watched Stranger Things, but...
You know, it's got a big weird flower face.
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
So the Russians were like the Russian people in the laboratory were trying to work to get this back out, because I even did like extensive research, and the reason why they were trying to like revive this creature was because they thought it would give them an advantage during the Cold War, which I found like very interesting. So yeah, there was like a lot of like secret operations, and even like the characters in the film would try and like go underground to see what's going on in this underground base. And there was like even this moment where there was like this secret message encoding sent by the Russians that Robin and Steven were trying to uncrack. So yeah, there was a lot of signs of just like secrecy.
You know, I'm putting something together that I didn't realize until you were just giving that narrative arc. In both films, in both the film Red Dawn and in the show Stranger Things, it is the Russians who have embedded themselves into literally like the heartland of America. In one case, it's Colorado. In one case, it's Hawkins, Indiana, which I guess is a fictional place.
Yeah.
But in both cases, the Russians have invaded the United States.
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting because that they're both set to be in America, and how like the Russians have like kind of made their own or like conquered a land. So it's like obviously in Red Dawn, like they're trying to attack and gain the entirety of the United States, and it's just shown in Colorado. But in Stranger Things, it's like obviously like they're not directly taking over their land, but they have like a secret base like in Indiana, and like the Russians are just like working there.
What did you find to be, or what do you project to be the consequences of this type of portrayal? Because again, just in the convo, it's clear you got two instances of Russian invasion. There, even in Stranger Things, which I'm a little bit more familiar with than Red Dawn at this point in my life, there's secrecy, cruelty, and it's just like when you portray, even if it's in a military context, you're portraying a group of people as ruthless invaders. Like, what does that do? Because I mean, I think this kind of relates to what you brought up in the beginning of like, oh, the Russians are always the bad guys. Like, what do you think that does? Yeah.
So, in my literature review, I looked at like the context of like how or why these Russian stereotypes began, and they all like predate back to like even the 13th century, which Russia was kind of seen as a natural expansionist. So they were just trying to like invade countries and take over
just
their
get
land.
More resources.
Yeah, so this began like all the way back into the 13th century.
Who was writing that in the 13th century about Russia?
I have no idea.
Oh, no.
It was like there was like this Sweden war, and like they were trying to conquer their land. It was like very specific like times.
Okay.
And this was very much seen in both Red Dawn and Stranger Things, because obviously Russians are invading Colorado and Indiana. So yeah, I think it was just kind of like a spin-off of what happened like way back. And I also looked at how these Russian stereotypes obviously began back then, but they were more so intensified during the Cold War in Soviet Union because of obviously what was going on. And yeah, and even like today, there was in 2014 the Russia annexation, or like Ukraine annexation, where Ukraine like had the removal of a pro-Russian leader, and this kind of like intensified tensions between them, and Russia tried to annex Ukraine, and they sent troops to their borders. So yeah, I feel like that's why Stranger Things incorporated a more modern scheme of Russian invasion, because even today, like the whole war with Russia and Ukraine, it's kind of just to show that it's still going on, and like kind of stereotype Russia as an expansionist. That expansionist vibe. I'm intrigued now. I gotta go back to the year 1200 and figure out what was going on in Russian expansionist history. That definitely has a consequence. What do you think on a personal level, like those frequent stereotypes and these narratives over time? What do they do? How does it impact you, let's say? So it impacts like not only me, but also other people, because they begin kind of narrowing the stereotype into like the Russian identity. So they begin like immediately associating Russia as this type of person that only wants to gain territory or kind of just be better than everybody else. So it does like impact people because they begin viewing this certain group of people in a certain like negative way.
So if you were being hyper competitive, they would just be like, oh my gosh, Vazira is being so Russian right now. She's trying to take over the situation.
Yeah.
I find that weird, but I feel like some of the stereotypes that we're applying right now to Russians could probably be applied to Americans in other countries as well. Like if you take into account the war with Iran, that's kind of currently ongoing right now. But this idea of like resource, like basically like intervening, getting in the middle of things, taking resources. It's almost, I don't know. It's almost like a mirror where you could be like, well, couldn't you apply those stereotypes to an American? And I just don't know if in other media out there, again, like if I was watching a Russian movie and it's centered on an American, I don't know if there's like a Russian equivalent of Red Dawn. I don't know. Do you know?
No, I wouldn't know.
Okay. I guess that's our homework. We got to figure out what that would, if that's the case. Because I do wonder how the Americans would be portrayed. In going through this process, what was the most important thing for you in terms of, let's say, like your academic development and trying to, because you've never done a project like this before. How did it compare to what you've done previously in school? And did you like it? Did you not like it? Or there's probably a mixed bag of things, but if you want to explore that.
So in the AP seminar, which is the class that we take before AP research, there was like a lot less freedom, I would say, like deciding on what topic you would like to pursue, because you have to follow like a certain theme, or you have to find a research topic that blends in with a source that was given to you. But we did this end of the year project in AP seminar after the AP exam, where we kind of just did like a mini project trying to figure out what we wanted to do in AP research. And I actually kept the same topic that I wanted to do.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, just because like I was so intrigued and like wanting to learn more about how these Russian stereotypes were rooted and how they align with political and historical events. And I just think that this project, like this AP research class, allowed me to kind of just want to do something that aligns with my own interests. So this class is perfect to, if somebody wants to conduct a research or do something in a specific field that they want to pursue. So yeah, and it gave me a lot more freedom, but also at the same time, it was also a little bit hard to manage on my own, because obviously in AP seminar, there was step-by-step instructions, but in AP research, it was like, you have to do this on your own, and you have to read, you have to find sources that align with what you want to do and either mimic or, and be inspired by those sources that were given to you.
Do you see yourself looking into Russian stereotypes in any other contexts? Maybe not formally, but maybe informally in the future?
So I was really like interested not only in like how Russian stereotypes exist in movies, films or series, but I also want to look at how Russians are depicted in journals, because one source that I found by Volgina, she explained...
Wait, I'm sorry, like peer-reviewed journals?
Yes, peer-reviewed, or even like newspapers.
Oh, okay. So like periodicals.
Yeah, so by Volgina, she discovered how like when Americans discuss Russians, they kind of embed like a specific tone and bias to make it seem, to kind of portray Russians in a negative type of way. So they use like specific words and like phrases to kind of show them in a negative way. And yeah, that's just like what I find really interesting. And then another source I found, another source I found shows how Russians were like seen in newspapers. And like, for example, this was about the Russian-Ukraine war. So for example, like the Ukrainian media would kind of portray Russia in a negative way, but then the Russian media would kind of show Ukraine in a negative way. So yeah.
When's the last time you read a news article about Russia that wasn't in the context of a war?
I don't really remember.
I don't
reading
I don't know
one.
either.
like, I think they were all in the context of, like, for example, like Russia and America. Like, for example, like their technological like differences and like advancements.
Yeah, I'm thinking right now. Well, I mean, what's been since 2014 that the is it been that long? Like 2014,
the
Russia,
annexation.
Ukraine, the annexation, annexation of Crimea. So it's been since 2014, and even then, before, I'm thinking just how many news articles I've read with Russia in the headline since then. It's always in the context of war, but even before then, it was usually focused on shady Russian billionaires. Like before it was about the war, it was always like shady Russian billionaires, and it was just like, okay, like it's like it's. But again, it's like I'm using this adjective shady, but I'm sure in headlines that was used like, oh, a questionable Russian billionaire. It's like, okay, so they're billionaire. Again, it's like using the same metric that we apply here, where we're like, oh, billionaires are a group of individuals that should be. I feel like in the U.S. the narrative is like they should be celebrated, like they've earned it. They're like geniuses or whatever. But if you're a Russian and you're a billionaire,
it's just bad.
It's just bad. You did it the wrong way somehow.
Like when I was watching, I think this came up in Stranger Things. They kind of showed like a Russian, I don't know, they kind of just stereotyped how Russians are wealthy and like kind of made it seem like a bad thing. I did notice that one instance in Stranger Things. I did notice it in Red Dawn.
Yeah, I would think no one's carrying their bling to Colorado to invade.
Yeah,
at that
no.
But yeah, I think I know which scene you're talking about. Anything else you want to say before we sign off? Because we're actually at time now.
I would like to say for the upcoming AP research students that really just find a topic and interest that you would like to do and that you wouldn't find like doing a chore. Like I know some people in AP research choose a topic that they're not interested in or that they don't want to do. So just choosing something will make the process easier for you and want you to like always try and learn more. So this is why I chose looking at the Russian stereotypes over time, because I was able to look at multiple sources from, you know, for example, the 13th century and even like now to kind of see like the Russian-American tensions. So yeah, and I would just recommend doing something that either aligns with what you want to do in the future or aligns with your interests.
All right. Should we say thank you in Russian to each other?
Spasiba.
Spasiba?
Spasiba.
Spasiba.
Yeah.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.